Mr. Lewis is on vacation this week, so I will be taking over pro tem duties, and Mr. Gregg will be handling finance. First order of business tonight, I would like to welcome Aaron Veland to the Ward 2 City Council slot. He was appointed by the Central Committee last Thursday evening, and he's going to be filling in the vacated Ward 2 spot from Jim Ferrett's resignation. That being said, we should have all received a proposed list of committee changes, and with the vacation of Mr. Ferret, that left Streets and Highways chair open, a Police and Fire seat open, as well as an Economic Development seat open. Mr. Sneed had expressed interest in moving into the chair position of Streets and Highways, and also into the vacant spot Police and Fire. This is the proposed committee list. Please look it over. If you have any questions or anything, please bring them up, and otherwise we'll be probably voting on these next Monday at the formal council meeting. Are there any questions on that? Okay, seeing none of those, we'll move on. Mr. Gregg does have a committee of the whole legislation request, and I would like to turn it over to him for that.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. I do have a committee of the whole request for legislation. Please prepare a resolution to appoint Julie Harwood-Smith to the Historic Preservation Commission as the council representative for the term ending December 31st, 2023. We voted on this already in council, but this is just to make it formal, as a formal piece of legislation. So we'll put that on the agenda for Monday. Any questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay, that's all I have for that one.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Mr. Creamer, Community Development.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. I have one item that falls under old business. It is in regards to the rezoning of parcel number 604597 located at 56 Fifth Street Southeast. The purpose of the rezoning is to allow for rental units and office. The zoning request is R1, one family residential, to RM-1, multiple family residential. Currently, we have a public hearing scheduled for next Monday at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. Are there any questions regarding this request from anyone? Okay, if not, we'll see everyone on Monday. That's all I have. Mr. Lombardi.
Thank you, Mrs. Creamer.
Mr. Lombardi,
yeah.
Excuse me, can I get a roll call of the city officials that are present?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Safety Service Director Barb Sylvester.
Present.
Assistant Law Director Edmund Mack. Present. Economic Development Director David Maley. Present. Parks and Rec Director Steve Pedro.
Present.
Fire Chief Matthew Heck.
Present.
Income Tax Budget Director Lori Katakides-Boron.
Present.
Chief Building Inspector Frank Silla.
Present.
And Officer Ken Davis.
Present.
Is there anyone that I missed? Thank you, Mr. Lombardi.
Thank you. Mr. Hermking, Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. There's a piece of legislation tonight for an economic development inducement grant for a legacy project located at 708 Tremont Avenue Southwest. I believe the owner and the executive director of that organization is present. I would ask Mr. Maley to come up to the podium and give us a little more information on this, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. This, like you said, is a grant for a legacy project. We do have somebody representing the project here. We did do an inducement grant back in a little less than 2 years, back in December of 2020 for this, when they first opened. $5,000 grant. They came forward for a expansion grant in essence. They are adding more employees. They're investing a lot of money into the project.
Thank you. Mr. Is it Langenhall?
Yes, it is.
You can come up to the microphone right there. Can you please tell us a little bit about the expansion project?
Sure. I have just a little bit of material that kind of shares a little bit more about where we are and the money that's been invested and where we've come since 2015. But yeah, we have a building over on 708 Tremont. It's been a blessing for us to have. It was something we purchased during COVID. And it's just a place for us to continue to impact Massillon as a whole. One thing that we're very proud of is the Massillon City Schools have contracted us for several different programs that they see a need in the community. So we are contracted with Massillon to offer a diversion program along with what we do inside the schools, our impact program. So the diversion program is something where kids that are on the verge of being expelled for whatever reason, they come to the 708 and we use our facility to try to, they come for 6 weeks and then by that they're opted out of being expelled from school. One thing that we're excited about the 708 is one thing that we realize with specifically with Massillon is kind of a shortage of nonprofit presence. And so what we hope to use the 708 for is to attract some of the great nonprofit things that are happening in Canton and having a space for them to be able to come to Massillon and use our facility to be able to bring programs, more programs like we provide for the kids, and just more opportunities for the kids to have more impact from nonprofit presence. Currently, we're serving over 150 students each week out of the 708 through our program that we have on Remix on Saturdays, and then we also have a church youth group, Abundant Life, that's across the street from us. They're having their youth group come on Sunday nights, and then we have some, we call it Blend, and so our program, if you're not familiar with it, we kind of our middle school program, so we do 4th through 8th grade, and what Blend is we have the kids that are graduating out at 8th grade come back, and we're teaching them leadership skills and just encouraging them to pour back into the community. And then they come and they're part of our Saturday morning remix, and so they're actually becoming mentors to the kids where they were part of the program at one point. So that's kind of where we're at. But yeah, I think Dave shared with us. So far, we put on a new roof, and I signed a contract with Stark Glass for windows and doors. So our total investment at this point at the 708 is close to $277,000 the purchase price. So, with that, we believe that it is showing the cause that we're going to be there for a long time, and we're going to set roots here and make that our home to impact kids for many years to come.
You answered, I think, one of my questions. You do own the building at 708 then?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Are there any questions from any of the members of the Economic Development Committee, Mr. Yolen or Mrs. Hartson? I guess I shouldn't say that. He hasn't been appointed yet to that committee. Any questions for any other members of council? Okay, Mr. Lingenhall, thank you very much. Mr. Maley, thank you. I will sign this to get on the agenda for next week. Mr. Lombardi, it's all for economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Herndon. Mr. Slutz, Health, Welfare, and Building Regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. I do have two this evening. The first, it says, please prepare a resolution in support of the adoption of the Stark County 2022 multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. This plan is updated every 5 years and is an effort to further identify, define, and characterize the hazards affecting the city, as well as to continue to identify and prioritizing projects that could lessen hazard vulnerability. Please see the attached draft resolution and a copy of the Stark County Commissioners' resolution adopting a plan. There is emergency language for this. I was told Chief Heck from the fire department can speak about this.
Good evening. Just like the resolution states, every 5 years aspect of it. And they come together with a consulting group. This one is out of Wisconsin, and they developed a multi-jurisdictional mitigation plan. So in that plan are different projects or strategies that help reduce or mitigate hazards and the risks that are associated with them throughout each community. So, and then those projects are prioritized based on economic feasibility, technical feasibility, social acceptance within the community. So a lot of what this has to do is it gives the communities a roadmap per se to help mitigate those incidents or those hazards, as well as the state provide technical support and guidance. And then the final aspect of it with the approval allows the jurisdictions to be eligible for grant funding to help with the projects going forward. So that process has to happen every 5 years. It's a review. Back in May is when we went back through that with the county and representatives from each jurisdiction as well as the consultants to develop the different projects throughout each community.
Thank you. Does any committee members have questions? Any other council? Mr. Drake?
Thank you, Mr. Jerry. Mr. Smith, I used to call him Mr. Smith. Chief, could you give us some examples of the hazards that this plan addresses?
Sure. For example, actually, priority number one is temperature extremes. Their mitigation action is a water spray park. The strategy is to develop a water spray park in the key vulnerable neighborhood. And it goes on with project status being new, potential funding sources, estimated time frames. But I will note, and it does include notes on part of these projects, the city of Massillon has been working to develop a water spray park for 3 years. Conceptual drawings have been developed and they're looking for additional funding to construct. So all that is incorporated into that process as to how that became highway project, their priority number one. That's one, that's a new project, even though we've been working on it for 3 years, is that correct? Okay. Other options or actions, here's an ongoing one that's actually priority number 13 out of 14. It's an ongoing project that deals with flooding, and that is to consider the feasibility and conduct acquisition, demolition, elevation, and relocation of properties in the floodplains. So this project is ongoing. It's attempting to identify a funding source, and that is coming forward from the last plan. It's moved into this plan as well. But again, at priority number 13, and all the parameters and criteria they use to measure those, probably has some technical issues, probably has some funding issues, but it's still there as a mitigation process to help with that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Chief Heck. I'll be signing that and putting on the agenda for next week. My second one is please prepare an ordinance to authorize the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for and receive sealed requests for qualifications, RFQ, for the city's Information Technology Support Managed Services through the QBS qualification-based selection process to negotiate and to enter into a contract upon approval of the Board of Control with the most qualified selected vendor. As required by ORC, the process will follow the requirements of the City of Massillon QBS process. But there is emergency language, and that is in order to allow the city timely submissions for new contract. Current contract expires December 31st, 2022. Mrs. Sylvester, could you speak on this, please?
Good evening.
Could you give us a little more information about this, please?
Yes, we have a current contract that we were in with our IT company that does all of our maintaining of all of our systems, our servers, all of our devices that we have in the city, everything from the email. They do all of our email. They host all of our emails. Also the network security, which is the protection for our viruses and all of that. On, again, all of our servers that we have throughout the city, as well as all of our the individual devices that we have too. So the contract expires at the end of the year, so we're going through the procedure here for the request for qualifications now.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Mr. Lombardi?
Thank you, Mr. Sluse. Mrs. Sylvester, can you tell me what we this is to replace the contract we have with BPI, correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell me what we pay right now for that current contract?
I don't have it exactly. We pay per device that we have, and then we also pay per server. I can get you the totals for that, though.
I'm just wondering, I don't really need that figure, but I was just wondering for comparison's sake, if it wouldn't be more prudent for the city to bring these services in-house and develop our own IT department, just because of the fact that this contract was for 5 years, the new one's going to be for 5 years. You know, when you're making those changes, let's say BPI does not bid or doesn't come in as the qualifying bid, now we've got to change companies over, and those changes can open up the city to compromise on the data, and that's what I'm concerned with, and that's probably my biggest concern here. Now, should BPI be the person who gets awarded the contract again, or the company that gets awarded the contract again, it's going to be seamless, but should they not, it could be, very frustrating for the city and the different departments.
I can tell you that it is a very affordable price in comparison to hiring someone for an IT. And I can tell you that from that comparison because of, knowing what it costs for employee benefits and so forth, as well as the budget that will be coming forward to you, or your previous budget that you had. You'll see that the courts have an IT person on there, and it's a lot more expensive than what we pay to a contracted vendor right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate your input on our IT as well.
Mrs. Creamer?
Thank you, Mr. Sluse. I have a few questions. So it's October 10th, and our contract expires December 31st. We have to go through this process, advertise and receive still bids. Is that going to give us enough time to complete this prior to this agreement terminating?
Yes, it will. We've actually gone ahead, Greg went ahead and put the dates and so forth on here. So if everything follows through and we do get it passed from an emergency standpoint, we would be having a site meeting on November the 3rd, and proposals would be due by November the 23rd.
One more question. Since we do not have an IT department, who is the qualified administrator here that would list out the qualifications for this RFQ? Since we don't have an IT department, how are we coming up with this IFQ?
Well, our engineering department basically puts it together, and they do know all of the servers that we do have throughout the city. They do know all of the software that is networked in with the hardware. They do have all of that information, and if there's any information that they don't have, let's say, for instance, the software that's in, income tax, they're going to go to those department heads and find out exactly, what their needs are. So our engineering department does have all of that information. And we do have it as well. If council remembers, it was not that long ago that we did just upgrade all of our servers when we had the CARES Act money. We updated all of our servers as well as individual devices. So at that point, we have all of the documentation from those purchases. So we do know all of the details of those servers to give any persons that are interested in bidding. We do have all of that together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Sylvester.
Thank you.
I'll be signing this, put this on the agenda for next week. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slutz. Mrs. Harvard Smith, Parks and Rec.
I have nothing for Parks and Recs tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Harvard Smith. Comes to police and fire, and we do have one item on the agenda, or one in here for police and fire. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but we are looking to update the scheduled rates for towing services, and a few other things here. I believe Officer Davis is here, and Mrs. Sylvester, if you could both please come up and speak to us.
This is basically to update, amend an ordinance that we took to the law department. Officer Tim Davis is our traffic officer, and he's been doing a great job for us. A lot of parking issues, also towing issues that he handles for us as a city. I know code enforcement sends him quite a few orders of junk vehicles that don't operate, expired plates and so forth, and he's done a great job with all of that. And we are at the point though where this ordinance has not been updated since 2007. So the towing companies that are here in our city that do the towing for us, it's time, and really well, it's long overdue that we update our rates to get them to where they should be good rates that are fair to the towing companies who are doing so much work for us.
Are there any questions? None? Okay. I will be signing this, and I will be on the agenda Monday. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for police and fire. We'll go to Mr. Sneed for public utilities and environmental.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. We have one on the agenda tonight. This is for a preparation of an ordinance to authorize the safety and service director to advertise for sealed bids and enter into a contract for the disposal of the municipal solid waste and recycling services for residential. I believe the last time this was worked on was about 10 years ago. Headed up by Mr. Lewis when he was on that committee. Does anybody have any questions on council at all? Seeing none, I will sign this and put it on the agenda for Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. We'll go to Mr. Gray, Rules and Courts.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. I do have one new item this evening. Request for legislation to please prepare legislation authorizing the auditor and the mayor of the city of Massillon, Ohio to enter into a 2-year contract with the local government services section of the auditor's state to compile the basic financial statements for the city of Massillon and the city of Massillon Health Department for the years ending December 31st, 2022 and December 31st, 2023. This does have emergency language as for the reason the contract being signed and returned by October 28, 2022. Contracts that we continually have in place. I will ask Mrs. Kajiz Moron if she would like to come up and address this legislation.
Good evening, Council. This is not really my legislation, it's the auditor's legislation, but I do believe that this is a contract that is entered into every 2 years. They have the audits done, we have the auditors come in and audit all of the city books. Jane has been here before. We've gotten perfect audits the last couple of years. I can't really tell you the detailed piece of it, but that is what this is for.
Sorry, I have you coming up for finance, so you might as well hang around.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
So, yeah, as I said, this is contracts that we have in place ongoing. Any questions? Mrs. Smith?
Are we mandated to do this? Like, why can't we compile our own? I mean, is it mandatory that we have to use this service?
Mr. Lombardi?
I spoke with with Jim Ferraro last week about this. Yes, it is a mandated thing through the Ohio Revised Code. This is something that we do. We do this repeatedly, and we have to get this according to the way that Mrs. Ferraro explained it to me. We have to do this to be able to prepare. Is it the projected budget to the state? I believe that's what it is. I will say, if you have any questions, she will be here on Monday. She could not make it tonight, but she will be here on Monday's council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Lombardi. I would add that typically you're going to have an outside audit of our books, something we can't do internally. So I think that's kind of how this applies.
I just wonder because, they're taking our information and compiling it on their software so it meets this requirement, why we couldn't just get the software and compile it ourselves? If it's strictly for the second check. All right, thank you.
Mrs. Kramer?
Is there a fee? And is it, since we have two separate contracts, there's two separate fees?
I can tell you that there is a fee. I don't know the exact amount of the fee, so that we'd have to get from the auditor's office, but there is a fee for the service.
For each contract?
I'm not positive, but I really can't speak to that, but I know there is some fees associated with it, yes.
Any others? All right, we will sign this and put it on the agenda for Monday. That's all for rules and courts.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Mr. Snee, Streets and Highways. Mr. Snee, Streets and Highways.
I don't believe anything from Streets and Highways tonight. And I believe, aren't you? Point of order. Aren't you covering Streets and Highways?
I was.
The next, yeah,
I
sorry. I just want to point out that would be
No,
okay.
Streets
Thank
and
you.
Highways.
I'm sorry. Yes. Streets and Highways.
Streets and Highways.
Thank you. And Mr. Gray, back to you for finance.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lombardi. So the first item we have, let me go back. I think we have one item of old business for finance. Maybe not. No, guess not.
We do.
For finance?
Yes, the one
Oh,
about
yeah.
the assessment taxes.
Ordinance 144.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we do have one item of old business for Finance Committee, ordinance number 144, 2022, which received first reading at our last meeting. It's an ordinance making certain appropriations on unappropriated balance of the 1100 general fund for the year ending December 31st, 2022, for the purpose of paying assessment taxes in the building department, and it has emergency language. Total amount requested is $8,800. Mr. Lewis gave this first reading at our last meeting. Are there any questions on this item? It'll be up for, obviously, for second reading in our next meeting. Okay, that's the only hold item. Under new business, please appropriate from the unappropriated balance of the 1100 general fund, $58,205 for Logic Central Dispatch account. The amount will cover payment for the remainder of 2022, the 2022 year, and is due to the new retroactive contract from January 1, 2022. So, Mrs. McGee's want me to speak to this item.
Okay, as the legislation states, this is to cover the Logic Dispatch invoices to the end of the year. I do believe in April, Ordinance 66, 2022 was passed, which was the new contract for Logic. Logic's contract was not completed at last year at budget time, so that is why the amount was not budgeted at that time. But we've since then received the new contract, which was approved, and this will pay for us for the remaining of the year.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from council? All right, that'll be on the agenda for Monday. Next item, please prepare an ordinance to appropriate from the unappropriated balance of the 1201 Street Fund $15,000 refunds income tax. Has emergency language to release the established funds for expenses related to income tax refunds for the year ending December 31st, 2022. This is one.
This is to pay for refunds through, I project the end of the year. As I always say with income tax refunds, I can't make a promise to you because you just never know quite what's going to come in. But after processing this month, we will need this to complete the rest of the year's refunds. Right now, our refunds are running a little bit less than last year, so that is a good thing. But this is actually, the streets pay a percentage of that, and this is to cover their percentage.
Any questions? All right, thank you. We have now, next, your transfer, a couple more legislation requests. Request prepare legislation to make certain transfers within the 2022 appropriations from within the wastewater treatment fund 2101 for the year ending 12/31/22. We're transferring $21,400 from Hospital I Dental and Life to Hospital I in Life. So I'm not sure what we're doing here.
There's two divisions in wastewater, so one of them is under the 615 and one is under the 610. So what we're doing is shifting, but this has to do with coverage change as the course of the year goes on. People get married, we hire people that have family plan, we may replace somebody that had just single. There's a significant difference with that. There's actually a significant difference between family plan and an employee with spouse or employee with child too. So through the course of the year, depending upon what our staffing models look like, or you could come in as spouse and an employee and then have a baby, which would change your plan as well. So that's why this plan is changing and the money is needed.
It does have emergency language to pay the health insurance in premiums in a timely manner, so that'll be on the agenda for Monday. I assume the next one is similar. Prepare legislation to make certain transfers within the 2022 appropriations from within the general fund, $1,100 for the year ending 12/31/22, $2,860 from SD revenue sharing.
So what SD revenue sharing is a school district revenue sharing. This portion of it is in the income tax budget. We normally project what we're going to need for that, and it depends on a couple factors that happen. We did budget $25,000 last year. We're not going to need that, so we were able to move it to, yes, the hospitalization line, which was a change in the coverage.
Okay. Also also mentions to pay health insurance premiums in a timely manner. An employee had a qualifying event in 2022, increasing health insurance premiums. Any questions? Okay. And then we have some transfers. First one is for the building department, transferring $8,000 from the supplies, materials, and postage to service and contracts. Reason for the change: to realign the 2022 budget for increased need for service and contracts. Any questions on that? Mrs. Creamer.
Just for clarification, I know we had that one request regarding appropriating from unappropriated balance of the general fund regarding service and contracts, and I believe, was that from the building department also? Is this additional funding going to cover those service and contracts? I believe that request was $6,500.
Talking about this evening?
Yes.
I think it was wastewater treatment.
It was the carryover of the second reading, which would be Monday from Mr. Lewis.
Oh,
I guess I'm just trying to understand additional funds regarding the service and contract piece with the building department.
okay. I know Mr. Silla was here. Mr. Silla, can you approach and address?
Good evening, Council. That's just a transfer. We pay our one inspector out of services and contracts, and we had money in our salary line item to pay him. But because of, he's a contract employee, and because of PERS, he can't work directly for the city. He has to be a subcontractor because he has PERS insurance. He's a retired inspector. So that's, the money was there. It's just a transfer in the services and contracts.
So you had to move it to a different account to pay it
We
from.
just had to move it to a different account.
Thank you.
Mr. Lombardi?
Isn't this part of what we already have on the agenda now that just got first reading?
Yeah, that's what Mrs. Creamer was referring to. We gave it reading to move $6,500 to an account entitled service and contracts. This isn't duplicate legislation.
No, it's not. I don't believe.
So then the total needed here would be 14.5? Is that what we're trying to do here?
Well, the 1%, 3% appropriations is money we take in. We're just busier than we expected. With every permit that we issue, if it's residential, we tack on 1%. If it's commercial, we tack on 3%. Okay, that money goes directly back to the state. So we ended up short in that account because of the number of permits that we approved for the year. So we need a little bit more on that, but this is something separate. This is just a transfer from the salary to the services and contracts.
May I answer your question?
Not really, but
Mrs. Sylvester, do you have any information on this? As far as why the seemingly duplication of the request, one amount being $6,500 and today's amount being $8,000. Is it just that $8,000 is to cover the $6,500 plus additional, or is it two total amounts that are being added together?
It's two total amounts that we add together. One's a transfer and one's an appropriation.
Okay.
so I guess that's my question. So the total that we need is 14.5. The 8,000 and the 6,500 to pay Jimmy Johnson's salary till the end of the year. Is that correct? why are we transferring 14.5? What's,
Well, we have a plumbing inspector that we pay out of services and contracts.
I guess, being part of the finance committee, I'm going to request that we get an actual breakdown of what these are between both legislations before I can sign this to go forward anywhere.
Okay.
I did give you a breakdown. I emailed those out after the private work session. I did give you the journal breakdowns from the auditor's office. It does have a breakdown of their entire services and contracts.
Can you verbally give that to us right now?
I can pull it up.
Thank you.
I have it, Barb. I have it.
Do you have it? I do too. So included in their services and contracts, you'll see what else is paid out of that account, which includes like the mowing that we contract out for code enforcement when we put the notices of violation and someone doesn't mow. Those charges then we do assess their taxes as well.
Okay, I see the two different contractors here, but I thought these two were referenced in the original legislation that is on the agenda currently.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is, where does the other 6,500, how does that pertain? What are we doing with, I'm
So
sorry.
basically the shortfall they feel that they'll have through the end of the year. So they're making the transfers, which is what all departments should do first. If you do, like in your supply line, if you've got additional funding in your supply line, you should transfer that first rather than appropriating from the carryover. So they would do the transfers first of any accounts that they do feel not have excess in, which I believe that's what one of them are. I didn't bring it back up with me now, but it's from supplies to services and contracts. That's what all departments should do first. Work within the budget that they have. That's why this time of year you will see a lot of transfers because again, if the auditor's office gets with us and say, hey, so-and-so's line's going to be short for insurance or, health insurance or the salary line for some reason maybe it's going to be short. You'll see some of those in here too. You'll see a lot of transfers at this time. So they would have done the transfer first to get to the amount that they felt they need through the end of the year, and then they also did the appropriation for the additional funding that they're going to need.
So the figures that I'm looking at here, these all add up to the 14.5, correct? I mean, I'm looking at a total of $52,799.60 for the entire year.
Mm-hmm.
I take it we've got a shortfall of
That's
14.5 in the
correct.
budget line.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, Mrs. Seleski, you mentioned typically you do the transfers first, then the appropriation.
That's correct.
Is this the opposite of that, though? We're getting transferred tonight, we already had the appropriation on the agenda, or we already gave that first reading?
Well, the transfers were there with that. It was all together at the prior work session, yes.
Okay.
And so, and then Mr. Lewis asked for the journal report from the auditor's office, and then we sent that out. So those came back through Diane. We put those back through then tonight.
Mrs. Kramer?
I just want to clarify, because I think we've got multiple requests in front of us. So last work session, we discussed additional funds for mowing services and code enforcement and contracts, the contract, code enforcement contract, correct?
Correct.
Okay. This request now is what I heard from Mr. Silla plumber inspector who's also a contracted employee. So we have two different situations.
So, but they're all paid out of services and contracts.
Right,
For the mowing, that's what you see on that journal from the auditors. So yes, you are correct.
So that's
Everything
why
is
there's
in there.
additional
Correct.
funds is for another
Right, correct,
contracted employee.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
And so let's say that we wouldn't have had as many mowing, our code enforcement has, done a lot of that in the neighborhoods this spring. There was a lot of that. So let's say there wouldn't have been as many, then they may not need any additional money in there. So it's a combination of everything that's paid out of services and contracts.
Mr. Hurricane?
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. So the ordinance number 144-2022 that we gave first read to last Monday was for $8,800 and included $2,300 for the 3% assessment tax and $6,500 for the services and contracts. And this budget transfers for $8,000, so there's an $800 difference. So to Mr. Lombardi's point, and I've heard a figure of 14,000 adding, or is it 14 or is it 8,000?
I guess.
Because these look very similar to
You
me.
have, again, it's what they feel they're going to be putting in
It's
here.
a total.
Okay.
35. Going into service and contracts.
All right, thanks.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have another transfer from building department to realign the 2022 budget. Transferring from salary, hospital, dental, and life, travel, schooling, supplies, materials, and postage, a total of $20,500 going into services and contracts to realign the budget. Any questions? Mr. Lombardi?
I'm sorry, but can we get an explanation as to what this money is for?
Mr. Siller?
Yes.
This additional transfer for $20,500 going into service and contracts, same account, what's this for? It just states to realign the budget for increased need. Do you know any
Well, I can give you-
specifics?
I can give you the history, and it goes.
Your microphone, please.
Button.
Yep, it's
Down at the bottom.
Okay, in February, around February, I lost my building inspector. And my building inspector was multi-certified. He could do plumbing and building, okay? So I had to hire somebody. Well, you can't find building inspectors anywhere in the state of Ohio. There's just a shortage going on right now with building inspectors. And to find one that's multi-certified it's impossible because they're just not there. Okay, so that's basically when we had to hire the plumbing inspector. And I give you the history on the plumbing inspector. He's a contract employee because he's a retired PERS employee, and his insurance doesn't allow him to be directly employed with the city. So that's basically why we needed more money in the services and contracts. Originally, there was money in the salary line item for that, and we're just getting it transferred over.
So it seems like we're kind of piecing this together. We got transfers for smaller amounts, and now we've got one large transfer for $20,500 going into the same account. You mentioned earlier part of that as plumbing inspector, right? So,
Right, and the code,
and a code enforcement
code
officer.
enforcement.
So the 20,500 is for what?
This, the one you have in front of you now, this is from the 1220 account,
No,
not from the 1100. That's a separate account.
Okay. So what, we're just realigning the budget?
That's correct.
Not, nothing
1220.
coming from the general?
Yeah, even though they both say building department, that's because both of those funds fall under him. That's his 1100 from the general fund. The 1200 fund also comes through, and you have that breakdown with you. That's the other journal entry I gave you from the auditor's office. You've got the 1100 and the 1220. You see the total expenses from there. And then these are the shortfalls from those two accounts.
Okay. Mr. Lombardi?
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. So am I to understand that we're now up to $35,000?
Well, you've got two separate accounts. Yeah, you've got two separate accounts though. The 1200 is the code enforcement account. That's the fund where when we have foreclosures and $8,000 is set aside to go back, and then $1,000 goes into the code enforcement that can be used for any code enforcement services. That's the 1220 account. And you have that journal entry there too that shows the expenses that are paid from there.
Mr. Sluse?
Mr. Silva, can you tell us what kind of training is required for somebody to be the building inspector and how much it costs? I'm asking, would it be cheaper to send somebody such as another code enforcement officer to get those qualifications for the city?
Yeah, that's not possible. I mean, you train to be an inspector by working in the field. Okay, my background is electrical. Okay, I've worked as an electrician. And in order for me to test to be an electrical inspector, I had to certify 5 years in the field. Okay, and then I was able to test out. Okay, I worked 10 full-time years in the building department, and according to the Board of Building Standards in Columbus, I could test for a building inspector. That allowed me to become dual certified. Okay, so you have to have 5 years experience in the trade in order to test for the certificate you want. So to answer your question, you can't hire somebody out of high school and train them to be a building inspector, and that come up before, you know. And if you go around different cities, I know Canton's, the plumbing building inspector we use is a retired Canton employee. He retired 3 years ago. Canton hasn't been able to replace him because there's nobody out there. Then he had their second building inspector retire, and they can't find anybody to replace him. And a lot of it has to do with the pay. You know, they're making $6, $8, $10 more an hour working at the trade. You know, and we were lucky because I knew a building carpenter, and I've been bettering him the last year. You know, with his test and everything, he's a 20-year carpenter, and I got him started taking his test, and luckily when my building inspector left and he went to Barberton to work, we were able to have somebody in line. If not, you know, I don't know where we'd find them.
Thank you.
Is that clear there?
So just to add on to that, we don't have anybody currently in the building department that has required experience but doesn't have the certification that could get that certification. Is that what you're saying?
Right. As a plumbing inspector?
Anything you're looking for, any inspector you're looking for.
No, I mean, my building inspector after 10 years could test for the plumbing inspector. 10 years, 9.5 years now. He's been with us a half year. Or he could try to get his electrical certificate. I had to certify 9 times to the state to get that certificate. Electrically, there's residential, building, mechanical, there's residential, commercial, I'm sorry. With electrical, residential, commercial. With building, there's residential, commercial tests you have to take. And then there's 3 building inspector tests you have to take. So, and that's part of the reason for the shortage, because nobody wants to test. So,
Okay, any additional questions?
I have one.
All right, sure.
So, as a qualification for the job, though, wouldn't that be something that we would want to mandate or, request that you have to have so much education or continue or become an inspector within so much time, in order to do your job? To have someone, so we're not contracting out?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
As far as like educate, like you're hired for the job and continuing education or certifications, should that be something that we should think about being required, if we were in a position?
It is required. I mean, I couldn't hire my building inspector unless he had a certification. So, is that what you're asking, or?
Right, well, I just, that we couldn't make that part of the job description that, you have to continue to get all the certifications. I mean, or isn't that possible?
It's not possible. Can't find people. Can't find people that are multi-certified. They're just not out there. I mean, we were lucky originally with the building inspector that left. He did building and plumbing, and then I did, he did building, plumbing, and heating, and I did electric, heating, and building. So we had everything covered with 2 people. Normally, you'd have to have 4 people. You'd have to have a separate electrical inspector, part-time, and part-time plumbing inspector, and then a full-time building inspector.
Okay, thank you. Next, transfers from income tax. $40,000 from salary income tax staff, $16,000 from hospital, eye, dental, and life, $4,000 from PERS, and total of $60,000 going into refunds income tax. The reason for the change to realign the 2022 budget to have sufficient funds and expenses related to income tax refunds, which we've already touched on. Any questions? Next is from the Legends. $6,000 being transferred from capital improvements, and $3,000 of that going into pro shop supplies, $3,000 into gas and oil for Legends. Realign the 2022 budget, pay expenses through 12/31/2022. Any questions there? Next, from Parks and Rec, $30,500 from salary recreation, $30,000 from accumulated sick leave, and being transferred into salary for the park, $11,500, and $49,000 into service and contracts. I see Mr. Pedro is here. Mr. Pedro, would you please address? Say something. So
yes,
you
right here. I appreciate that. Yeah. The salary and recreation line, we have a little more budget in there than we're going to need this year. So we want to move that down to our obviously the salary in the parks. And the reason being, we have one of our retirees is not retiring until after the first of the year. So that's why we're taking it out of accumulated sick leave. And then the salary for the park, where we're adding the 11.5, we've already hired a new person to take that person's position. The one employee is retiring January 4th officially, but his last day is November 1st with all his vacation. We hired someone 5 weeks before he is actually gone to help train that person. We haven't been in a situation like that before, so it's actually going to help our parks department. And then one cost that we did not budget this year that we're going to incur before the end of the year, we need to replace the floor in the studio, our fitness studio. We've been trying to piece that thing together, and it's just time. It's having a lot of issues, so that's where most of that. It's going to be about $44,000 to get that replaced.
So that's 44,000 of the 49.
Yes. That's the first estimate. I'm hoping someone comes in a little bit lower, but it's been there for 20 years.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is for the auditor. $756.86 transferring from county collection fees into developer TIFs. Reason is to realign the budget to pay LRC Meadows their share of real estate TIFs through the budget year 2022. Any questions there? Next we have, for the health department, transferring $40,000 from salary account to the grant account to align the budget. I don't think we have anybody here from the health department to address this. Thank you.
Okay, that $40,000 was part of the grant that was given to us to supplement salaries. That was moved earlier in the year with the intention of hiring an employee, which we did hire, but never started with us. So that $40,000 was never used in that salary line in the health department from that grant. So they're putting that money back into the grant fund where it belongs.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? All right. And finally, through municipal court, transferring $4,100 from bail salary to, and that same $4,100 to the bail's health insurance. And, as we've said, this is basically where a pass-through from municipal court may handle that, so. And that's finally all I have.
Okay, Mr. Gregg, thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Excuse me, I think there one on Jill Harwood Smith.
I'm sorry?
That first?
Yeah, we did that.
Okay,
It's going on the agenda.
can we adjourn, Mrs. Dyson?